They arrived without a sound. One moment, the sky was a calm canvas of blue. The next, it was blotted out by enormous vessels, matte black and impossibly vast, hanging above every major city on Earth. They didn't fire. They didn't land. They simply hovered, their presence a quiet suffocation that pressed on every mind. Satellites failed. Communication scrambled. Gravity itself seemed to hum differently under their weight. The first voice wasn't human. It rang across every speaker, screen, and device, a deep resonance, layered in synthetic precision and chilling calm. You are approached by the Ithri Dominion. Your species is under review. You will undergo 3 trials. Win, and Earth will remain sovereign. Fail, and you will be absorbed. Governments panicked in unison. Military jets were scrambled and silenced before they reached altitude. Missiles launched, then stopped mid-flight as if caught by invisible hands. Within hours, Earth's defenses were rendered ornamental. The message was clear: resistance wasn't war, it was irrelevance. The UN convened an emergency session, streamed to whatever public networks still functioned. Faces aged by stress debated under flickering lights. Arguments flared: surrender, attack, negotiate, until one elderly delegate from a small island nation said quietly, "If they demand a challenge, then we give them one. On our terms." Silence followed. That was the first moment humanity chose defiance, not despair. The Ithri transmitted their challenge details within seconds. 3 trials, one of intellect, one of resilience, one of meaning. No elaboration. No extensions. A planetary council was formed overnight. Linguists, mathematicians, athletes, musicians, philosophers, soldiers, children. The world didn't unify because it was noble. It unified because extinction was a shared language. All digital platforms lit up. Scientists and artists from every corner uploaded theories and ideas. The internet became a forge, refining, arguing, building. One viral message spread like wildfire. They think we are simple. Let's show them complexity. Let's show them humanity. Panic didn't vanish, but it mutated into urgency. In bunkers and laboratories, in music halls and slums, people prepared in their own way. A chess prodigy from Nigeria was flown to Geneva to train alongside a quantum physicist from South Korea. An Afghan war veteran taught endurance techniques to Olympic hopefuls. A child in Brazil uploaded a poem that would later be cited as the first sound Earth made back. The world was cracking: food shortages, economic collapse, riots, but within that chaos was an undercurrent of something else. Not hope, not yet. But resolve. A quiet, bitter refusal to vanish. For the first time, humanity's gaze turned not inward but upward. Toward an enemy that didn't hate us, but judged us. The Ithri saw us as variables. Our uniqueness, they believed, was a flaw. They were old. Cold. Perfected. They had seen empires rise and fall, and expected another failed experiment from Earth. What they did not expect was stubbornness. Not cleverness, or strength, they expected those. But the thing that made humans stand upright, even when logic begged them to kneel. That illogical, inconvenient spark that burned against the dark. Among the selected representatives, there was no uniform. No anthem. No flag. There was only a phrase etched into the entry room where they would be sent to the first trial. They test us for weakness. Let's show them what made us climb out of the dirt. No one slept that night. The air was sharp with fear and purpose. Entire cities went silent as the world watched the chosen few ascend the platforms that the Ithri had materialized. They rose, enveloped in light, vanishing into the sky. Not warriors. Not diplomats. Just people, unyielding, terrified, determined. The world didn't know if it would see them again. But in that moment, across nations, languages, and belief systems, one truth bound every beating heart: humanity had been challenged. And it had answered, not with surrender, but with fire. The first trial began in a void. The chosen delegates stood before a levitating construct, a sphere of shifting segments, colors changing with each motion. It had no buttons, no instructions, just movement that responded to thought. The ethery voice declared, "Solve it before the last rotation. Understand it, or be deemed unfit to reason." The construct didn't follow logic as humans understood it. It wasn't a riddle of math or physics. It bent perception, responding to emotional impulses, fragments of memory, intuition. For hours, the human team analyzed it, arguing, failing. A machine would have given up. They didn't. One by one, each tried something different, singing notes, recounting personal memories, even meditating near it. A linguist from Egypt noticed patterns in the shifts, not in what changed, but what didn't. A young coder from Mumbai cross-referenced those patterns with human brainwave rhythms during dreaming. Together, they decoded its rhythm. The construct didn't want logic. It wanted self-awareness. The breakthrough came not through competition, but cooperation. 6 delegates synchronized their focus, sharing emotional memories aloud while shifting the sphere's structure together. Each voice harmonized with the others: fear, grief, joy, guilt, and the construct stilled. Then opened. The ethery offered no applause. Only silence. But the humans knew. They had passed not by mastering complexity, but by embracing vulnerability. The second trial began hours later, in a synthetic world designed to test endurance. The environment changed unpredictably: searing heat, bone-cracking cold, zero gravity, toxic winds. No tools, no rest. The trial ended only when each participant reached the final checkpoint, an unmarked monolith across jagged, changing terrain. One by one, contestants dropped. Even trained athletes struggled to adapt. It wasn't just about physical strength. The environment was engineered to exploit personal weaknesses. A woman from Peru hallucinated a childhood trauma in the frost. A Japanese Marine faced echoes of lost comrades in the dust. One man collapsed in a zero-oxygen tunnel, lungs burning, refusing to crawl further. But the turning point came from the most unlikely participant, an amputee veteran named Eli from Detroit. His prosthetic leg malfunctioned during the gravity inversion phase, locking up completely. He fashioned a crutch from shattered platform debris and moved on, dragging himself over terrain designed to break the whole-bodied. Others, inspired, refused to quit. One delegate turned back to carry a fallen teammate on her shoulders. Another, suffering from altitude sickness, taught others how to breathe shallow to endure. The ethery had expected decline after individual stress thresholds. Instead, they saw the opposite: human performance increased with adversity shared. When the final checkpoint was reached, there were fewer victors than at the start, but more unity than ever. The trial wasn't survived by the strongest. It was survived by those who lifted others. The third and final trial had no form. Just a question. Demonstrate your species' meaning. The ethery expected achievements, monolithic structures, numbers, inventions. What they received was something else. A blind pianist from Prague performed a composition that shifted time signatures to mimic human heartbeat patterns under stress and love. A Kurdish refugee painted the story of her flight using pigments made from crushed flowers and ash from bombed-out walls. A young girl from Kenya told a story, unscripted, about her grandmother's hands and how they smelled like burnt bread and safety. There were no explanations. No metrics. Just offerings. Then, a moment unplanned. One of the delegates, a Brazilian boy barely 15, took the stage and simply cried. He spoke of nothing. He just wept. The others followed, not with sorrow, but with memories. Laughter, lost songs. They shouted names of the dead, of friends, of failures. One started singing. Another joined. Eventually, the whole chamber echoed with overlapping voices, languages, moments. It wasn't a performance. It was a confession of existence. The ethery did not react. No flicker. No analysis. They ended the trial without comment. The humans were escorted back to their holding chambers. No score was given. No verdict. But among themselves, they knew what had happened. In trying to show meaning, they hadn't proven they were superior. They had proven they were alive. Unquantifiable. Unreproducible. Human. They waited for a response. Hours passed. Then a full day. No announcement. No ruling. Only silence from above. When the Ithri finally spoke, their words were not what anyone expected. Evaluation complete. Results inadmissible. Humanity exhibits instability, unpredictability, and dangerous potential. Challenge revoked. Integration will proceed. The words dropped like stone. No explanation. No appeal. The trials had been theater. A performance designed not to offer choice, but to study. Humanity had never been given a fair chance. The illusion of merit masked the inevitability of conquest. World leaders demanded clarification. None came. Instead, Ithri's ships descended lower, dispersing smaller crafts across continents. Infrastructure failed instantly, targeted disruptions, not destruction. Roads, power grids, water systems, all selectively disabled to disorient and suppress. Troops weren't deployed. The message was clear: resistance was irrelevant. Domination didn't need force. Just control. Anger flared worldwide. Protests erupted, but collapsed under blackout conditions. A surge of despair swept over cities. The idea that humans had won, and still lost, shattered something deeper than fear. Trust. Belief. It wasn't just war. It was betrayal on a cosmic scale. Then, a signal broke through. Not from any government, but a private satellite in low orbit, jury-rigged by a rogue engineering team in Australia. The broadcast was short, distorted, but unmistakable, a voice calm, clear, defiant. You lied. You asked who we are, and we showed you. And you feared it. That message ignited the first spark. Hackers across the world began tapping into Ithri relay nodes. Not to destroy, but to study. Every recovered byte was shared openly: code, patterns, architecture. They didn't try to overpower the aliens. They tried to understand them. In a basement in Warsaw, a linguist and a neuroscientist decrypted the emotion suppression algorithm used by Ithri speech systems. In Johannesburg, a mechanic repurposed the Ithri energy node into a crude short-range EMP. In Manila, a teenager converted a captured drone into a mobile uplink tower, restoring communication between resistance pockets. None of these were armies. They weren't even coordinated. But they moved with purpose. Quiet, decentralized, relentless. The same stubborn current the Ithri had failed to account for during their tests, the refusal to surrender meaning, even in defeat. One critical breakthrough came from a research station in Iceland. Scientists discovered that Ithri network systems filtered out emotional frequency bands from human neural activity. Their entire intelligence model couldn't register concepts like hope, sacrifice, grief, only quantifiable outputs. It wasn't just arrogance. It was a flaw. They didn't understand why a father would run into fire for a child he couldn't save. Why a soldier would shield a stranger. Why someone with no chance of victory would still stand. That gap wasn't just cultural. It was strategic. It made humanity unreadable. The resistance adapted quickly. They used unpredictability as a weapon. Instead of uniform action, they leaned into chaos, asymmetry, disobedience, art, symbols. Messages hidden in graffiti, in songs, in food. A Ithri observation post in Berlin was overwhelmed, not by weapons, but by thousands playing instruments under its base, sending harmonic disruptions through the hull. It collapsed, not from damage, but from incomprehension. No single act turned the tide. But something began to shift. The Ithri systems started showing signs of strain. Pattern breakdowns. Minor AI feedback errors. Not from sabotage, from overload. They couldn't filter meaning fast enough. Humanity was bleeding noise into their silence. The betrayal hadn't broken the human spirit. It had clarified it. The trials had been real, just not for humanity. They had been tests of Ithri certainty. And the aliens had failed. Humanity didn't just reject subjugation. It became incomprehensible on purpose. Impossible to predict. Harder to control. And as the resistance spread, one truth echoed across pirate broadcasts, etched into walls: whispered into dark. You didn't just awaken a species. You awakened a question you can't answer. The Ithri responded with escalation. Their algorithms recalibrated, adapting to emotional data, trying to reduce humans to patterns again. They broadcast a message planet-wide. Resistance is decay. Unity is survival. Join and be preserved. But the message had lost its weight. Humanity no longer feared preservation. They feared erasure. So the answer was silence. Non-compliance, not defiance. Systems fell into disarray not through sabotage but disobedience. People refused to follow patterns. Power grids remained down because no one tried to restore them under alien instruction. Cities grew wild, decentralized. The more the Ithri pushed for order, the more disorder adapted around them like smoke evading grasp. A critical turning point came when the Ithri attempted direct assimilation. Select humans were chosen, uploaded into containment matrices for study. But something broke inside the system. One of the minds, an elderly poet from Morocco, didn't collapse under the upload. She expanded. Her thoughts infected the framework. Not like a virus, but like poetry bleeding into math. The matrix began generating recursive loops of metaphors, memories, nonsense. It spiraled. Ithri protocol labeled the failure. Semantic corruption. The poet's mind had introduced contradictions the system couldn't resolve, truths that could not be reduced. The matrix was dismantled. But too late. Every subsequent assimilation attempt ended faster, more violently. Human minds didn't break when absorbed, they broke the absorbent. Then came the null pulse. The Ithri deployed it over South America, wiping all unshielded tech and neural data across 7 countries. They expected collapse. What followed was improvisation. People returned to analog systems, building crank radios, steam-powered vehicles, handwritten communications. The past wasn't weakness. It became armor. A reminder that humans had lived in darkness before, and still created fire. In the ashes of disabled cities, cultures reawakened. Oral histories returned. Music flourished. Unconnected villages sang in languages long thought dead. It became clear, the more the Ithri tried to suppress identity, the more identity multiplied. Each attempt to standardize humanity only amplified its deviation. Meanwhile, a covert coalition of former rivals, scientists from rival nations, made an unprecedented discovery. Ithri ships operated on quantum consensus networks, built on stabilized probability layers. But human irrationality interfered with their consensus field. Near unpredictable human behavior, their systems had to dedicate increasing energy to recalculations. That wasn't just a bug. It was an Achilles heel. Instead of attacking, humanity saturated the airwaves with contradiction. Music was shifting rhythms, theater performed in reverse, logic puzzles with unsolvable endings. A digital storm of unsorted data swarmed their ships. Ithri systems faltered, not from physical damage, but from conceptual overload. A makeshift transmission tower in Alaska became the testing ground. A single satellite dish repurposed into an emotional broadcast device. It didn't carry information. It carried raw, unfiltered human sensation, mourning, rage, ecstasy, extracted from volunteers through neural translators. The pulse hit a nearby observation craft. The craft didn't explode. It just stopped. Hovered. And then fell. That became the weapon. Not bombs. Not guns. But confusion, contradiction, meaning. A war fought through essence. In regions once controlled by the Ithri, humans built noise towers. Devices that emitted constant, evolving signals with no discernible pattern. Some played thousands of conversations at once. Others generated unsolvable riddles, historical tragedies juxtaposed with nursery rhymes. The purpose was singular: make humanity unreadable. The Ithri began withdrawing observation units. Not because of defeat in combat, but because every second on Earth was costing them more energy, more uncertainty. Their models degraded faster than they could rebuild. Every calculation became a guess. And every guess carried risk. Humanity didn't know everything. But they knew one thing the Ithri couldn't model: meaning wasn't a code. It was a story. And stories can't be calculated. They can only be lived. What began as conquest had become collapse, not of humanity, but of assumption. The aliens had encountered something they couldn't solve. A species whose greatest weapon was not technology or strength, but refusal to be defined. The withdrawal was quiet. No declaration. No ceremony. One morning, the skies were clear again. The Ithri ships, once massive shadows over cities, simply vanished, pulled back into the void they came from. No wreckage. No warning. Just absence. Humanity didn't celebrate. Not immediately. Suspicion lingered. Many believed it was a trick, another phase of manipulation. But as days passed and no counter-strike came, reality settled in. The invasion had ended, not by destruction, but by disintegration. The Ithri hadn't been defeated. They had been dismantled, thought by thought, truth by truth. What followed wasn't triumph. It was reckoning. Nations rose from the fractured systems they had relied on, now aware of how easily everything could be erased. Governments that had clung to hierarchy found themselves irrelevant in a world that had survived on improvisation and interdependence. Power shifted, not upward but outward. Communities that had endured together found strength not in central authority, but in shared experience. A new kind of communication emerged. Not broadcast, not command, but collaboration. People spoke in stories, not slogans. Traditions re-emerged, no longer as relics, but as tools for rebuilding. Music became currency. Language became fluid. Art became memory. There were no victors. Only survivors. And they weren't the same as before. Human science advanced, not by mimicking the Ithri, but by rejecting their approach. Precision was no longer the goal. Adaptation was. Fields once siloed merged, philosophy shaped code, emotion shaped design, unpredictability became foundation. Engineers stopped asking, "How do we control this?" and started asking, "What does this respond to?" Systems were built to evolve, not remain static. Nothing was fixed. Everything was alive. A monument was erected, not of stone, but of moments. In the center of what used to be Geneva, a data archive played on loop, showing fragments of the resistance. The pianist's rhythm, the child's poem, the voice that defied the first broadcast. It wasn't curated. It wasn't clean. It was chaos. That was the point. Children were taught not just facts, but paradoxes. They learned how to question without needing an answer. They studied failure as a path, not an end. Creativity was no longer extracurricular. It was critical. For the first time in centuries, Earth was united, not under rule, but under understanding. Survival had demanded cooperation, not conquest. The challenge hadn't been to defeat an enemy. It had been to remain human in the face of extinction. The Ithri never returned. No signals. No probes. Their empire, once unshakable, likely continued elsewhere. But a crack had formed in their foundation. They hadn't been repelled by force. They had been rejected by reality. Humanity's refusal to be predictable had corrupted the Ithri model. What they saw as failure, humans called living. The event became a turning point, not just in history, but in identity. Humanity no longer measured progress in control, but in expression. The question shifted from, "What can we do?" to, "Why should we?" Some feared forgetting, falling back into old habits of domination, of power hunger. But those who remembered carried the flame. Not to protect it, but to spread it. A phrase once whispered in defiance became etched in education, policy, culture. Asterisk. They tried to understand us through equations. We answered with meaning. Asterisk. Not everyone agreed. Some argued for restoration, stability, simplicity. But simplicity had failed them once. Complexity had saved them. So they embraced it. Years passed. The world reshaped itself. Not perfectly. Not peacefully. but with purpose. Humanity had not proven it was superior. It had proven it was unsolvable. And in that mystery lay its survival. In the end, the greatest challenge wasn't the Ithri. It was the mirror they held up. And Earth, scarred and luminous, looked back and said, "We are not your answer. We are the question you'll never finish asking."